it's kind of the same name that we have for our morning. So evangelizing to a post-Christian culture. And I'll start off by saying that I don't know how many of you have heard the name Raniero Cantalamessa. So he's an Italian priest, and he is the preacher to the papal household for the last 3 popes. And one time he was preaching out there in London, and he said that sometimes what happens to us is kind of like the locomotive and the carts where you have all the weight. And he says, the locomotive is Jesus, is Christ. And he's pulling a lot of weights that are part of being Christian. And we tend to give people the weights of the carts before we have them love the person of Jesus. How many times have we heard people, maybe not amongst ourselves or maybe ourselves, that feel that God is the party spoiler, the party pooper, the Mr. No. And that's because there's not enough love, because in a marriage, there are so many things you refrain from doing and you don't even think about it. It's love. I will, let me see. I just want to mute everybody, mute all. There we go. All right. And so, so what he says is we have to make people fall in love with the locomotive in order for them to be able to carry the loads. Now, some might say, Father, how can we talk about the commandments of God as loads? Well, they actually, we are under the beautiful yoke of Christ. He talks about that word, right? So Jesus, I mean, just in case there's any justification needed for the Acts of the Apostles, go to the ends of the world. Jesus definitely tells us, I did this a long time ago. I was giving a conference and it just occurred to me to ask, hey, by any chance, does anybody need for me to justify that we truly need to go out and bring this message to others? And that person, something in his upbringing or formation was like, yeah, isn't that imposing the gospel, sharing it with others? So there could be in us the question of why bring the gospel? Well, because the Lord asked of us. John 21, go and make disciples and go to the ends of the world, which is all of the message of Acts of the Apostles. First Peter and then Paul, especially Paul going out. So Father Eric already mentioned it, and you and I have been talking about it for sure, because with our values, we're always talking about this crazy world we're living in. And John Paul II, let us not forget that he said a phrase in a document called Novo Millennio Ineunte, saying we need to evangelize with new methods, new expression. Please, note the words he used, and new ardor. New methods, new expression, and new ardor. New fire. And we have to find it in prayer. And that's why Father Eric started with the Word and the Eucharist. And there is, I don't know if some of us know about this gathering. In the time of Pope Benedict in Brazil, there was a huge, I would call it even like a mini ecumenic, a mini council, a mini Vatican II, pressing a little bit. It was called the Reunion of Aparecida. All the bishops of Latin America with Pope Benedict. Why was that? Why did that become so important? It was very important because in a certain sense, the Pope noticed that out of all the regions of the world, the bishops and the cardinals that were most united were Latin American. And it is the region of the world where you have the most amount of Catholics. So they came together and there was a new document, the document of Aparecida, in which I will read, and this is typed number 44. He says, Pope Benedict, or whoever wrote this document, We are living through a change of epoch, the deepest level, which is cultural. And in number 341, he says, we need to have theological research which helps faith to be expressed in language that makes sense to these times. And I want to underline this, language that makes sense to these times. Okay? So what is the scheme of our talk today, friends? Our scheme is the following. First, we're going to have a phenomenology. What do we find? What do we see? Then how we got here. Third part, how we can adapt. And fourth part, 5 keys to evangelize. And I'm going to give you a little homework, but if you don't do it, you don't flunk the test. But I encourage you to do it. Okay, so this is phenomenology, which means what is going on, how we got here, how we can adapt, and then 5 keys to evangelize. So we could go on and on about this, but I'm going to be quiet, and I want you to read these 4 stats or statements about Catholicism. It's astounding that the largest religious group in America is former Catholics as we speak. What are we doing wrong? What are we getting wrong? I mean, this is Bishop Barron that is always talking about Christophonic. Every bishop talks about it every time they come together. And, you know, there's so many other stats. I saw a presentation from a legionary a couple days ago in Atlanta who was giving a talk on how to live the encounter with Christ properly. For those who don't know, encounter with Christ is one of the main weapons, if I may use it that way, the main spiritual weapons that we have in the movement. And we don't know where it was born and what sometimes we might not know. And we will get to this at some point in one of these mornings. Why is that? Does that have such a apostolic and evangelizing strength? But anyway, and he was showing so many stats. I didn't want to put too many. I just thought, look, they've got it. They know. Just put 3 or 4. We know that we're not doing well. Now let's listen to Bishop Barron himself.
So, do you believe in God?
No.
I do not.
No, I do not.
Same here. I don't find it necessary for me in my life.
I went to a Jesuit high school, but I've been mostly atheist for my whole life.
They're too much built on old religion rather than moving with the times.
Half of American Catholics leave the church at some point in their life.
They just say, I no longer believe. What they're really struggling with is belief in God in general.
The church is failing to engage young people. They are not moving someplace else. They're just disengaging.
There's the pain, there's the doubt. Was this ever authentic to begin with?
They're mostly ambivalent. They're mostly indifferent.
They simply drifted away.
They just don't see why religion matters.
We're living not just in an era of change, but a change of era.
And we have to figure out what to do because this is not business as usual. There's something dramatic and something catastrophic going on.
Our own people are making up a sizable percentage of this growing group of the unaffiliated.
Years ago, we could confidently assume that Catholics would come to the institutions of the church, to schools and universities and parishes to be evangelized. But today, this is increasingly not the case. Armies of Catholics, especially young Catholics, are joining the ranks of the religiously unaffiliated. So identifying these nones, the N-O-N-E-S, and seeking to understand their motivation should be a top priority in the life of the church. Today, the number of the disaffiliated rises to a staggering 24% of our country. So, who are the unaffiliated? Why are they leaving? And how do we get them back?
And you know, something it'll be a beating, a drum that I beat is we need a change of heart for this to be done because we, including I who is speaking, we are sort of trained the way the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees are trained in a certain way. We are trained to look at evil and point it out. And so we'll get there. So how we got here, I want to propose to you 4 big causes after extensive reading and just simple, it can be simple, but also in-depth analysis. Let's take a look at these. The first one is the sexual and feminist revolutions. The 60s, with the push of, the devil is very smart, and he knows that if you touch sex and marriage and family, you've got it. And that's where they went. And ever since the 60s, we have been, and this thrusted a lot, maybe not only, but a lot by communism and socialism. Right after the fall of the wall, there were new attempts of, kind of proposing these ideas that don't precisely come from the gospel. And with this, and this includes many things. This includes abortion. This includes gender ideology. It includes a lot of the things that are so current right now, and that we definitely need to uphold and defend. This, we know, and whoever has studied, principles of communism and socialism, since there are the divisions of poor and rich are not as clear as they used to be. Now the divisions need to be between man and woman. Separate the man from the woman, and separate the men among themselves. Create divisions so that you can bring a division in culture, and therefore we can bring in a Messiah, the Messiah Chavez, or the Messiah Maduro, or the Messiah of any country that we find, such as the president of my country, Mexico, who it's just following a pathway, and you destroying all these family values under an ideology. So that would be one. And we could have a whole weekend on that topic, but we can't. Number 2 is materialism. This society we live in which, whether we, in as much as we try, we might fall into it sometimes, where there is no transcendence, no soul, no spiritual reality. The only thing that counts is what we can touch, what we can see, what we can smell. And a lot of people out there just, they have a yearning in their heart, but they don't know what to call it. And it's materialism. Then we have one that, Pope Benedict has been talking about for a long time. And that's why he and Pope John Paul II, John Paul the Great, had to do the encyclical Fides et Ratio Relativism, because, you got your truth and I've got my truth, and it's just opinions. There's a lack of solid ideas. And the influence of the church in the world today is very small. Sometimes even non-existent. And that's why we have to invade the social media and all these, platforms, because we got to be where they are, especially millennials and Generation Z, or the tech generation. And then one that is rampant, maybe in the US like none other, is the entitlement mentality, which is the word that Pope Francis gave. Individualism, hedonism, self-invention, which is the word that Bishop Barron uses. We live in an era of self-invention where it seems that we forget that we are standing on the shoulders of giants of the past. And this is precisely what got me to write my own book, which in English it'll come out in about 3 or 4 weeks, Solid Ideas in a Liquid World. Because we live in a moment where there are very few solid ideas. We're not hanging on to metaphysics, the foundation of philosophy, and gnoseology. How does man know? How does he acquire knowledge? How does a man or a woman become wise? And I've been thinking a lot, why do I feel that the entitlement is so strong in the US? And I'd love to discuss this with some of you at some point, because it's just a theory. But I think that with the I'm 18, you can no longer say anything to me, Mom, Dad. I know what to do. So you can't, barge into my life, I know well, which is so present. So this is how we got here. Now, how we can adapt. And here are some principles that can help us. So one of the things is, I call it the truth versus the whole truth. What do I mean by that? The Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, from the very first moment they came to be, they have what in Spanish is called the propuesto. It's even old Spanish. That word doesn't even exist anymore. But the concept of that is, when a person who is going to evangelize is going to come in contact with their interlocutor, with the person that they're going to talk to, doesn't need to bring out the whole truth right from the beginning, like being, I want you to know the whole truth. Let me give you all of the dogma, all of the catechism, that's why in my master's program in John Paul the Great Catholic University in San Diego, they said, we first have to evangelize. Evangelize means say the good news. What is the good news? The kerygma. What is the kerygma? Is God, Jesus, who became a man, died for you out of love and resurrected, and he's sending you out. And that's the good news of the gospel. And so the Pope says in that document, when I say that we need to preach the kerygma and come back to it, or when he says that the kerygma is the first announcement, he doesn't mean, and he clarifies, it doesn't mean it's an announcement that you do at the beginning and then you go on, you move on to all the moral stuff. No, it's something that you have to come back to all the time because the hearts are wounded. Now, this pedagogy is not of Pope Francis. If you pay attention, the pedagogy of God in the Old Testament is he reveals by stages. Remember that he gave all of these laws to the Jewish people. And then Peter asked him, Lord, can we divorce our wives? And he says, not now, because now you're grown-ups. Now you know, Peter. And even then, Peter he could not bear that. He said, well, this is tough. So who can do this? And God said, everything is impossible. What's impossible for man is possible for God. So even God, in this, with the word that we use in the Old Testament, sin katabasis, he stoops down to our level and talks to us like little kids and takes us in a progressive, let's say in an evolution, to be able to understand its full message. David could not have understood Christ's message. He wasn't ready. It was 1,000 years before Christ. So you do see an evolution there. And this, friends, this is something that requires conversion, as I was saying, because the way we were brought up is a way in which we want to bring those weapons out immediately. The truths, the principles, the rules that we have that are also very important. In this, I want to emphasize the difference between saying both and, but where you put the emphasis. We're not saying this yes, that no. As Catholics, we're always both and, scripture and tradition, works and faith. Protestants are just faith, no works, just scripture, no tradition. No. It's both and in many things. And different moments in time will be the guideline to what we emphasize in that time. And then how we can adapt, it's when misery meets mercy. And this we can take either the parable of the adulterous woman, where misery meets mercy, she meets the Lord, or the parable that the Pope just used for his new document, which is the Good Samaritan. It is the priest and the Levite who did not stop to have mercy for their brother because they were too busy doing what they were doing. It is the other one who stops. So it is important that we need to be careful in discerning Catholic issues in the light of national issues. And this is a biblical principle. Let me read something that I come across in some articles in the past 3 weeks. It must be recognized that there are some sectors that have entered into an ideological drift of faith. They do not announce the charisma, but a more or less conservative ideal of decency. They do not promote the Christian event, but the reasons to prepare to undertake cultural battles. They believe that Christianity is mainly a moral life, a liturgical custom, a rejection of things like abortion, homosexuality, and the like, losing sight of the fact that no one is saved merely, and that's the key word, by their moral coherence or by receiving communion in the mouth or in the hand, even though these topics are important. You see how we're not saying, no, write that off, take it away, erase it. We're saying, at this moment in time, just like God said, I will allow the Jewish people to divorce because of the stage that they're at, although that's not the objective, moral, ethical principle that when Jesus answers that question, he said, in the beginning, Adam and Eve, it was not so. But because you have hardness of heart, that was allowed in the Old Testament. And now the man who will leave his mother and father and become one flesh with his wife. And so the rule, in a certain sense, evolved, changed in the eyes of some. So we need to strive to adapt through a heart of flesh according to the Lord. And we'll give the hows. The hows we're coming up on them. So what are the 5 keys to evangelize our post-Christian world? So here they are. Number 1, prayer as a key element. Second is trust in God, but lock your car. And I will explain that in a moment. Then we need to be radicals, but radicals in love and mercy. Number 4 is know the faith well to transmit the faith well. And number 5 is spend time with the different ones, the ones that don't think like you do, like we do. So here's a phrase I'd like you to read here, prayer as a key element. Go ahead and read it on your own. If there's one thing that the Holy See, through Cardinal Velasio, who was the direct representative of Pope Benedict, told our movement, was Martha, Martha. Sometimes you say you're contemplative, but you're not contemplative enough. The translation of the letter in Spanish, when in a certain sense the Holy See spanked us, was efficiency at all costs. That doesn't take anything away from the word militant. We can be militant, but we need to be contemplative and conquering, contemplative and evangelizing. So here, Dom Chotard, the soul of the apostolate, says we need to trust more our prayer, our spiritual life, our union with Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, in the cross, in the gospel. Father Eric was preaching in the word. And we should go out by overflow. And we should be, when we are filled with the Lord, then we can go out. And it's a simultaneous thing. Again, as Catholics, we say this and that. As I pray, I go out. And then I come back to prayer like a football team. Huddle, play, huddle, play, huddle, play. So prayer is a key element. Then what I mean by trust in God, but lock your car is do what you can, but then rest in peace. So I've always thought, I heard a priest say that, look, at the end of the day, I look for vocations, but if I don't find them, this business belongs to Jesus. I didn't die for my brothers and sisters. I need to know how to live in peace at the end of the day when I don't get done what I was supposed to get done. And of course, as intelligent people who have received the gifts of God to analyze, then we say, what did we do wrong? But there needs to be peace. We are collaborators based off of peace of mind and heart. We work for this, but we don't lose our peace. For this, I mean the gospel. We do what we can, and then we trust everything to providence. Benedict XVI, in his first homily, I think I shared this quote with Hope recently, about 3 weeks ago. He said the following in the first homily. This is how he reveals himself to be the true shepherd. I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus says of himself, it is not power, but love that redeems us. This is God's sign. He himself is love. How often we wish that God would show himself stronger, that he would strike decisively, defeating evil and creating a better world. All ideologies of power justify themselves in exactly this way. They justify the destruction of whatever would stand in the way of progress and the liberation of humanity. We suffer on account of God's patience, and yet we need his patience. God, who became a lamb, tells us that the world is saved by the crucified one, not by those who crucified him. The world is redeemed by the patience of God. It is destroyed by the impatience of man. There's a priest in Tyler, Texas, who right after the riots and the looting told his congregation, it told him something very similar to what Pope Benedict was saying here. And he said, if we get rid of everything that we see that is wrong, we just got rid of St. Paul. Because St. Paul drove St. Peter up the wall for a time when he was persecuting the first communities. And God allowed him to go on. And then he became the apostle of the Gentiles. And he is actually a patron of our movement in our congregation. So let's go to number 3. We to be militant or radical, but in love and mercy. And here I want you to listen to Arthur Brooks, who is a Catholic, who has a numerary son. He's a Harvard professor and former CEO or president of the AEI, American Enterprise Institute, talking about how many times we use our weapons, we use our values as weapons and not as gifts.
Arthur, one of your books, The Conservative Heart, you have this, setting a stage, you say, conservative principles are effective to change the world, but they're not trustworthy many times, or to many. Why? What is your vision on this?
Well, I'm not very ideological. I'm not very political. So when I say conservative or liberal, what I'm really talking about is in the American context, politics. We think of conservative as a certain set of principles about the economy, about national security, about social policy. And, I'm pretty sympathetic to a lot of it. I believe that capitalism is the greatest force for lifting people out of poverty in human history. I think that the United States has an obligation and a privilege to use its military forces as a force for good around the world. And I have a lot of socially conservative views. And so I look around and I say, why aren't all of these ideas more popular, especially among young people? And the answer is because they're not attractive. And the reason they're not attractive is because people who hold these views frequently make them unattractive. Now, this is not about conservative or liberal per se. This is about a problem that we have in a polarized society in which people actually use their values as a weapon instead of using them as a gift. That's always a mistake. If you have values, they should always be a gift and never be a weapon.
They should always be a gift and not a weapon. Let me give you an example. Yesterday we had a C4 in our house. I'm not going to pick on anybody. I'm not going to say any names. But at some moment, somebody said, I can't believe that people think this and this about this and that. I'm not going to give more. And you say, well, you know how? They just don't have a fraction of the formation that you have. That's why they think that way. If somebody says, keep up the vibes or the good energy, it's just because they have. Many times, they didn't have the upbringing that you and I have. So we can say, no, keep up the prayer, keep up the graces. And so that's where it's very hard for a generation to adapt to the evangelization of the new one, because they simply are wired differently. Just imagine the total amount of criteria that we would have different if we had been born when the millennials were born. When you're born with an iPhone under your armpit, how much information they've been given, how many challenges to the parents' values. Mom and dad used to control everything that you and I would think. That's impossible for today's parents. And you have grandparents saying, I don't understand my kids. They don't know how to bring up their kids. Well, you know why? Because you weren't a parent when they're being a parent. It's much harder. So there's a great challenge. And there's a great challenge for the church as well. So we have to be the ones, Pope Francis keeps saying, that don't have the radicalism of the sword and of condemnation and uncritical legitimization. We have to be the prodigal fathers, or the fathers of the prodigal son, who are so merciful, and they understand that the son ran away and spent all his money on prostitutes and bad living, and not like the older son. And Christopher West in Theology of the Body says this: behold the fact that the younger son is closer to eros, to the desire, the true desire of our hearts, than the older son. Because by going into his passions and trying to feel them, he's saying there's a yearning in my heart and I need to fulfill it. I'm just looking in the wrong place. But the older brother, he's got heart problems, hardness of heart. We go back to Jeremiah. No, it's Ezekiel. I'm going to change your hearts of stone and give you a heart of flesh. The same one that Jesus encountered, mercy meeting misery. Woman, nobody condemned you. But then he's very clear for those who want sin to disappear. Go and sin no more. You actually sinned, woman, but I love you. So it's very clear what he was saying. He was putting their doctrine and mercy together, but his love just had her see only the mercy. And I'm sure that later on, we don't know anything about her life, who she became. She would love the locomotive so much that she would carry the carts. Number 4, know the faith well to share the faith well. This quote is a little bit later on. I'm going to go back so that you don't get distracted. I will show it to you in a second. Know the faith well to share the faith well. And so I would only say this. Sometimes, and I think Arthur Brooks was referring to that, sometimes we might fall into frustration of not being understood with our principles. But we don't realize that we are giving very unsatisfying answers based more on dogma and moralism than what this generation can understand, what they are equipped to understand. Remember, they were born in a post-Christian society. We were born in a Christian society. The type of leaders we had when I was a kid in the 80s, imagine, look, we had these people. We had Margaret Thatcher. I'm not going to canonize her, but she was a good woman. We had Ronald Reagan. We had George Bush. We had Francois Mitterrand. I'm not going to canonize him either, but he was more decent than what we see now. We had John Paul the Great. I'm going to make a joke here. Even Mexico had a decent president. So I'm picking on my own country. No, I'm kidding. We didn't have a decent president, but the US did. It was so different. We had so many models. And we've lost many of them. And then the last thing, the key to evangelize, number 5, is spend time listening to those who different and pray about what we encounter. So Rick Warren, the pastor in California, Saddleback Church, who has the fastest growing church in America, who has the, according to, I haven't researched this, I might be wrong, but I heard the other day that he has the second most sold book in the history of, after the Bible, Purpose-Driven Life. So he's got the book that has sold the most, says the following: the more time we spend with the ones that think like us, the less capacity we have to understand the ones that we are called to evangelize. And Jesus said, go to the ends of the world. Not just go to your friend who is a fallen away Catholic, who almost thinks like you do, but he wants to give the church a new chance. That is certainly one group that we need to reach out to, but it's to the ends of the world. So now,
Arthur,
and now this is the quote from Evangelii Gaudium that is very, very beautiful. I will be quiet so you can read it on your own. So this is how out of the box, how radical, how beautiful we can think of evangelization. More than self-preservation, it's going out, right? And I want to end by saying with the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. And so with the Spirit, I would say 2 characteristics: filled with joy, Evangelii Gaudium. Father Eric mentioned it. But that doesn't mean give up just because the world is really bad. So we're Father is saying here that we should forget about a catechism, the 10 commandments, and the, moral ethics, sexual moral ethics of the family. No. Jesus would say, find the moment, find the time, prepare your brothers and sisters, accompany them until they are ready for that. They are so far away that we just have to, it's kind of like a mom that has her daughter come up to her or her son and say, Mom, I want to do drugs. If the mom says, how is it possible? Do you think she will ever come back to her? She has to pretend that it's kind of like, oh, really? Now tell me about it. That's interesting. And she's inside, she's feeling that she's being crushed, but she has to keep an open door, because otherwise the daughter will do it even more. Mom, I'm in love with this jerk. No, not that one. I want a king or prince for you, honey. Mom, but I really love him. Well, you want to have an open door to her. What do? You say, all right, well, I'm gonna, your dad and I are always with you, honey. And just want you to think about it well. We want the best for you. And you start finding ways, right? Well, that's what we need to do. But we do it gladly for our children because we have them in our house, because we gave birth to them. But the people that are around us are children of somebody, especially of our Father, common Father. And so it takes conversion. I think that this is not an intellectual feat only. As Catholics, it's also intellectual, but it's also spiritual. It's both intellectual as well as spiritual. So this is what I wanted to present today. And believe me, we have to come back to these topics because this is not something that we get once and for all. I'm still trying to convert. And when I go to the city and I see this cart or this trailer that says Weed World, my first tendency is, how is it possible? Weed World. And I have to say, some people are so far away from the Lord that I need to turn on my merciful heart and say, that lady in that car, in that trailer selling that, she is not and think about all the negative adjectives that we could put there. She's been underserved and she's wounded, necessarily wounded. If we are wounded with all what we received imagine them. So I will stop here.